Hi everyone, I'm Arya Jane. I'm your Vice President, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's webinar. It's going to be packed with insight and advice that we think you're going to love. Our guest today is an industry professional from Visa, a global leader in digital payment and technology. Whether you're passionate about software, engineering, cybersecurity, or just curious about careers in technology, this conversation will give you a real look at what that looks like and how to get there. So let's get into it. Let's start with your story. Can you share your career journey and how you ended up working at Visa?
Yes, absolutely. So I started out working in the healthcare space. I got an MBA focused on business, and I originally was working in my very first job at a hospital around data insights and analytics. So really working with the strategic planning team to do decision support. So how do we enable leaders, executives to make the right decision, giving them all of the pros and the cons of the question they're trying to answer, and then they can decide from there. I then moved on to do consulting, and in that consulting practice, I was going into various health systems throughout the country and helping advise them on performance improvement. So, how do they make their operations better? How do they treat patients quicker, more efficient, more on time? I apologize if I need to restart. Let me know.
No, you're
Um,
totally
okay.
fine.
And then I was actually recruited into Visa. So I came over to Visa when they were starting a team called the Global Business Optimization Team. And what that team focuses on is driving insights and analytics around performance improvement of how your payments are approved by an issuer. So when you swipe your card at Starbucks, you get an approval that comes through, or you get a decline. How can we make it so that the approvals happen more often? So we want to be able to have a 99% approval rate, for example. And so I was coming in and working with the business to help identify areas of opportunity that we can say, hey, these issuers or your bank is declining more often because of this reason. Let's go solve for that reason.
Mhm.
I then moved on from that to leading a team in the risk space. And so I went from doing authorization improvement to fraud reduction. And so they're actually two sides of the same coin. If you approve too much, you're ultimately approving fraud. If you decline too, or if you have too much fraud, issuers are going to stop approving your transactions. And so that's where the other side of the coin came in.
Mhm.
And I started leading the team there. I very quickly was promoted to the vice president, leading the whole strategy around data and analytics. And most recently, I've just moved into a new role where I'm bringing the auth world and the fraud world, which we call client services and risk, into one function. So it's been quite a journey. I would say I've been doing this for about 15 years. And in that 15 years, I started out very junior, not knowing how to do any coding, any analytics, any Tableau, no visualizations, no storytelling. And when I started, there wasn't a lot of analytics things out there. A lot of people were still doing it in Excel. So having to learn along with the technology change has been really interesting over the past few years.
And I know a lot of our members are thinking about future careers in a lot of the fields that you just mentioned. So in terms of engineering and tech roles at Visa for new graduates or interns, what's out there for them?
Yeah, so we have a lot of internship programs, depending on what you're looking to accomplish. Some of the areas are around, there's a 12-week hands-on program that we offer specifically around software engineering, data science, and cybersecurity, and a lot in product development. Visa does a lot of product development, new products, emerging technologies, it's always changing. So part of this internship program, you can participate in technology talks, executive speaker series, a global intern case challenge. So part of that 12-week program is you solve a real world problem and be able to introduce that into the organization. We also have what's called the New Development Leadership Program, and that is for new recent graduates of undergrads. And those come in, they actually do a 2-year rotation. And within that 2-year rotation, they actually do 6 months in each part of the organization. And it's really interesting because it goes from having to interview to get into the program to now the teams are interviewing to actually for you to pick them. And so it kind of goes both sides. It goes from once you're in the program, then you're prime choice and you want to be picked, or the team wants to be picked for these new graduates to come in and use their skills. Because a lot of times even though they're young and they're new, they have a lot to offer. And so it's always really interesting to see that 2-year program because we always have a rotation come through on the data analytics side. Because a lot of them want to understand data engineering or product development. But when you come to that, understanding the insights in the data analytics is really important to it and actually helps drive better development when you understand what the data side looks on the other side and how performance works. And then we have apprenticeship programs. What those are, they're typically like boot camps, and those are 16-week boot camps that are a year of on-the-job training based off of aptitude and interest. And so those get developed as there's somebody who may not have a undergraduate degree or may not be going to school, but have a really good technical skill, whether it's software development, computer engineering, cybersecurity, any of those kind of special interests. And if you pair up with the right leadership, they can actually create this program and say, okay, we're going to bring this person in, use their skills. AI is a really good use case of this where you don't, I mean, there's maybe a lot of AI programs out there, but nobody's really doing AI in the way that like a business would typically want to develop something new, 'cause it's so new to the industry. So that's a really good opportunity as well as the apprenticeship programs.
That's interesting. If any of our members wanted to apply to anything right now in regards to visa, what's out there for them?
But we do have a recruiter that we do work with that I'm happy to share. But it's called university recruiting. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be finished with your undergraduate graduate degree, but they do focus on recruiting for the positions that need an immediate fill, or if somebody has the ability and the time to do a mentorship program, that in there as well.
My next question is, Visa is known for innovation in digital payment. How does Visa use technology to solve real-world problems?
Yeah, so we are a business. It's actually, it's funny. People a lot of times think that we're a technology company, but more than anything, we're actually a communication company. Because what we typically do is we're tying or connecting your issuing bank to the merchant bank and the cardholders in the middle, and it's really communicating the information along the way. So some of the areas that, as a technology company, that focuses on communicating information, is we want to, enable the secure, fast, reliable payments. We do that through fraud detection. So we use AI and machine learning to really detect and prevent fraudulent transactions in near real time or real time and blocking them. Another area is that we do what's called tokenization. And so we'll actually take your card information, encrypt it with a different digital ID, and then that's what's used when you're using your Apple Pay, for example. And so it makes it more secure coming through. Also, if your card gets closed or like you lost it, the card will still operate on your Apple ID because it's not using the same card number. You don't have to get a whole bunch of new information. And then, of course, there's a product development in the AI space. So within AI, we're really focusing on what are the new areas that will drive more efficient payments within the ecosystem. How are we able to do performance improvement, but also from an enablement and an efficiency perspective? How can we onboard clients into the ecosystem in a safer, more secure way? How can we ensure that cardholders are having the most clean experience when they're going in and running their card? And all of that's done through AI, machine learning, through technology development, through product development, also through configuration. So how does an issuer or an acquirer configure their systems to operate well with each other?
That's a really great example of like, I guess, adapting to technology and like a newer digital age. That's really helpful. So kind of going off that, can you give an example of a specific project or innovation at Visa that impacted like a community globally or locally?
Yeah, so one area that we've really focused on is called an advanced authorization score. And it's actually a machine learning score. It's one of the first use cases that I actually think really exists out there around using AI to develop a risk score. So basically, what it does is it takes every transaction into the ecosystem, assigns a score to it based off of, I believe, 52 different identifiers on the transaction record.
Mhm.
And says, is it risky or not? And then that gets sent to an issuer, and an issuer can say, I want to approve or decline a transaction based off the riskiness of this. What's interesting though is that it's constantly learning. And so if there's new behaviors that are happening in the ecosystem, if there's new behaviors happening in how fraudsters attack cards or as new digital payments come into the fold, how do we develop the model to be more smart and more intelligent? And it's been around for about 20 years. So it's not even something that's really that new. What's new about it is how it's operating, how it's becoming more real time, and how it's evolving to be smarter in the score mechanism.
Our members are, of course, curious about what working in tech actually looks like. So what does a typical day at Visa look like for you? Like, would you say it's more face-to-face interaction or more coding, building, and how would that vary like position?
So it's a great question. It does vary. So when I first got into technology through an analytics space, I was spending most of my time writing what we call stories. So they're basically Jira tickets that say, well, this is a project we're working on. Here's how long the project will take. Here's how much effort the project has. And then we submit that as part of like an end of year planning or an annual operating plan that basically says, this is what the team's going to operate, like do over the next 6 to 12 months. Here's the resources it's going to take, resources in and people, infrastructure, technology, and here's the cost of it. And then what I would focus on when I was earlier on in my career was actually coding. I was doing a lot of coding in SQL and HQL, which is more of a data lake, where SQL is a relational database, so the data just joins differently. Um, and then when you're coding, it's always trial and error. Now we have Copilot, we have all these things that allow you to code much faster. When I started out, we didn't have that. So we barely had Google that was giving you support in testing. And so it was a lot of trial and error where I was just sitting with headphones on, really focusing on like, okay, if I'm trying to pull this data and I'm trying to answer this question, what do I need to do? And a lot of times it was even writing it out before you even started coding it, like putting your brain in and writing a like a plan. Like I don't know if you like when you're in school still, if you still write outlines to your papers.
Mhm.
It was like that. It was like writing an outline to a paper. So then you would code it, then you would pull the information and validate it,
Mhm.
make sure is data correct, does it make sense? And then you would start analyzing it and you would put it into a tool, whether it's Tableau or whether it's Excel or PowerPoint, whatever you're using to analyze. Then you would tell a story and then you would tell the recommendations. And all of this doesn't happen within a day. Like this could be weeks long projects, right? Where the first stage is understanding the question. It's we're meeting with stakeholders, so meeting with the people asking the questions, meeting with technology to understand do you have the right capabilities in place, then answering the business question through coding. Now I'm in meetings a lot. I don't code anymore, which is actually like the worst part about being in a leadership role is you kind of get out of it and you're not as close to it anymore. It's good in some ways, it's bad in others. So, when you're coding all day, you get, a little bit redundant and you're like, man, I really wish I could just do something else. And then you're doing the something else and you just want to go back to coding. So now it looks like a lot of meetings. So I sit in meetings all day. I mean, today it's 5 p.m. and I was in meetings from 8 a.m. until about 3:30 today, where I was just back to back. And something else that changes in the day-to-day life is when you're first starting out, you typically are project based. So you'll get put on a very specific project and you'll be in that project and really focused on it. When you
Mhm.
can become more in a leadership role, your every meeting may be a totally different subject, maybe a totally different business problem you're trying to solve, maybe a totally different team that you're working with. So the ability to transition between projects and transition between problems and solutioning is a skill that does keep your brain very busy. And it's very different from being able to just focus and be like really honed in on an analytical problem. Same thing with technology. I mean, I'm talking a lot about analytics, but that happens the same thing on technology where there's different aspects of it where there's like the planning part of technology and then there's the testing phase and then there's the development and then testing again, and it's all very similar to the analytics space. It's just a matter of what your output and deliverable is. My deliverable tends to be a Tableau workbook or it tends to be a PowerPoint, where on the technology side it would be like a product of some kind.
Okay.
So
How would you say you use creativity and problem solving amongst your team, especially like when it comes to dealing with like technology challenges and
yeah,
quality?
it's a really good question. So being creative is actually a really big part of technology because there's frameworks that are in place, right? There's frameworks in how you should do something. There's best practice. But you also have to be creative enough to think like, what do I have at my fingertips? To be scrappy enough to say, okay, this is what I'm able to accomplish with what I have. Or the business is looking for X, Y, and Z, but they don't know how the path is to get there. And being able to creatively think through, okay, what steps do I need to take to get to the end goal? Where the business side may not always know what the end goal. They know what the end goal is, but they don't know what they need to get there. And so you have to sometimes be creative, the right tool for the right job. Sometimes going around best practice to be able to get like really involved and have a lot of agility to break apart the business problem to solve for it. So it's a big piece of it. We always say being curious is the most powerful tool.
Yeah, definitely. So, right now, like in high school, what kind of emerging Like we kind of already went over this with AI, but what emerging technologies and trends should students be looking out for, maybe researching if they're interested, and what opportunities and like internships, mentorships can they look for right now related to that?
Yeah, so a lot of times you don't even need like a formal internship to learn a lot. Like there's a lot of things out there that didn't used to be out there. Highly recommend if you want to stay in technology, learning Python. If you're wanting to get more in the data space, understanding SQL or just relational databases in general.
Mhm.
Really understanding the various data tools. There's Databricks, there's Power BI, there's Tableau. On the technology side, really understanding the various codings that are out there. Project management is really important on the technology side. As much as it is like the technology development, a lot of it's being able to manage that. There's different methodologies. There's, waterfall versus agile, and what do those mean? You don't always it used to be that you didn't have to have a degree to get into technology. And now it's just become best practice where people go to college, get a degree in some sort of engineering field or computer science. That didn't used to be the case. Highly recommend learning about the cloud and APIs and how those work because everything that we do is around cloud computing these days, API, Python, automation, AI. That's where the language is really going. But you don't have to go and get a degree for that. I mean, you can, and obviously, just highly recommend it. A lot of times, you can do self learning, and that's where some of these mentorships really come into play, or apprenticeships really come into play, because it doesn't necessarily rely on a degree at that point. It requires on a skill that you've learned. If you think about like Mark Zuckerberg, for example, he never finished school, and he's created Facebook. So
And finally, what is the best piece of advice that you could give to students who are thinking about a future in tech, engineering, or just a company like Visa?
I would say stay very curious, learn everything that you can. It doesn't necessarily have to be the typical path for people to go is to go straight to college, which I still highly recommend. But being able to get outside of the standard education system and looking around self curiosity, going and using ChatGPT to learn more. I mean, that didn't used to exist. And so the fact that you literally have something and just tell me more about Python and it'll give you all of that information back and you can just go deeper and deeper and deeper. I would say is probably the most important things is to really take your education into your own hands and really focus on becoming an expert at whatever you find interest in, whether it's blockchain, whether it's APIs and cloud computing, whether it's AI or machine learning or data science. Like it really, even with a degree, it still requires a sense of desire to learn and desire to want to do really well at it. I have a business degree. There's nothing in my degree that taught me about what I'm doing today. That was all self-learning and self-taught that I've learned how to SQL on my own. I learned how to visualize on my own, but I also did go out and get the right certifications. When I was learning how to Tableau, I found a lot of interest in it, and I found that I was consistently coming up against some struggles. So I went and did the Tableau certifications and said, okay, let me go sit down and actually do a hands-on training. And those sometimes are way more powerful than people give credit for.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that inspiring and practical advice.